In the vast and powerful kingdom of Persia, there was this great king named Xerxes who ruled over an enormous empire. His land stretched all the way from India to Ethiopia, and honestly, the king was super proud of his wealth and might. So, to show off just how magnificent his kingdom was, he decided to throw a spectacular feast. But, this wasn't just any ordinary celebration, it lasted for 180 days. Day after day, nobles and princes from every corner of the empire flocked to the citadel of Susa. They came to admire the king's riches, the gorgeous tapestries and those golden goblets. The guests dined on the finest foods and sipped the best wines. Everyone was just amazed by the splendor of King Xerxes and his mighty Persian empire. After that long feast for the nobles finally ended, the king decided to hold another celebration, this time for all the people living in Susa, the capital city. This party lasted for 7 whole days. The palace gardens were opened up for everyone, rich and poor alike. There were white and blue linen curtains hanging from silver rings on marble pillars, and the couches were made of gold and silver, placed on a beautiful mosaic pavement of precious stones. Wine was served in golden cups, and each cup was unique. The king was incredibly generous, telling his servants to let everyone drink as much as they wanted. It was a time of pure joy and celebration. On the 7th day of this huge feast, King Xerxes was in high spirits from all the wine. He had a beautiful wife, Queen Vashti, and he wanted to show off her beauty to all his guests. To him, her loveliness was just another one of his treasures, something to be displayed. So he called for his 7 most trusted eunuchs and commanded them to go to the queen's chambers. Their task was to bring Queen Vashti before the people and the nobles, wearing her royal crown so that everyone could gaze upon her beauty. Because honestly, she was very lovely to look at. The king was sure everyone would be amazed by her. But then, something totally unexpected happened. The king's messengers went to Queen Vashti and delivered the king's command. But Queen Vashti refused to come. She just would not allow herself to be paraded like an object in front of the drunken crowd. When the servants returned to the king with her answer, he was absolutely furious. His face turned red with anger and his pride was deeply wounded. So, he turned to his wise advisors and asked them what the law said should be done to a queen who disobeys her husband, the king. His advisors were worried. They said that if other women heard that the queen had disobeyed, they might start disrespecting their own husbands too. So, they advised the king to remove Vashti as queen and choose someone else, someone more worthy to take her place. After the king's anger had finally cooled down, he started thinking about Vashti again. He remembered her beauty, what she had done, and the decree he'd made against her. His attendants noticed he was lonely, so they came up with a plan to find a new queen. They suggested, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. They proposed that officers should be sent to every province in the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young women and bring them to the citadel of Susa. There they'd be placed in the king's harem under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women. The young woman who pleased the king the most would become the new queen in Vashti's place. This idea really pleased the king, and he ordered it to be done. So, the search began. Now in the city of Susa, there lived a Jewish man named Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin. Mordecai had a young cousin named Hadassah, whom he had raised as his own daughter after her parents died. Hadassah was also known by her Persian name, Esther. She was a lovely young woman, with a beautiful figure and a kind heart. When the king's command was proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel, and Esther was among them. She was taken to the king's palace and put into the care of Hegai. Mordecai had given her one very important instruction. She was not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. Esther soon won the favor of everyone who saw her. Hegai, the keeper of the women, was especially impressed. He quickly gave her the best beauty treatments and special food, plus 7 female attendants chosen from the king's palace, and moved her and her attendants into the best part of the harem. For a whole year, the young women prepared to meet the king, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. When it was each young woman's turn to go to the king, she could take whatever she wanted with her from the harem to the king's palace. But Esther asked for nothing except what Hegai suggested. Her humility and grace made her stand out. Finally, when it was Esther's turn to go before King Xerxes, she won his heart completely. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. He saw in her a special grace and favor that none of the others had. He was so captivated by her that he placed the royal crown on her head and made her his queen, instead of Vashti. To celebrate, the king gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials. He declared a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal generosity. Esther had become the queen of Persia, but she kept her secret. She did not reveal her family background or her Jewish heritage, just as Mordecai had told her. Mordecai was a loyal subject of the king and a loving guardian to Esther. Even after she became queen, he didn't leave the city. Instead, he took up a position sitting at the king's gate, a place where officials and citizens would gather, where news and information were always being exchanged. From there, he could keep an ear out for what was happening in the palace and the kingdom. He worried about Esther and wanted to stay close by in case she ever needed him. Every day, he would walk back and forth in front of the court of the harem to find out how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. He remained a humble man, even though his cousin was now the most powerful woman in the land. One day, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he overheard a dangerous conversation. Two of the king's officers, Bigthan and Teresh, who guarded the doorway to the king's private chambers, were really angry with the king. Mordecai listened carefully as they spoke in hushed, bitter tones. They were plotting together to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai knew he had to act quickly. The king's life was in serious danger. He understood just how grave this was. This wasn't just some idle gossip. It was a conspiracy that could throw the entire Persian Empire into chaos if it succeeded. His loyalty was to the king, and he knew he had a duty to protect him. So, without wasting a moment, Mordecai found a way to get a message to Queen Esther. He told her everything he had heard about the plot, explaining who the two officers were and what they were planning to do. Esther, trusting Mordecai completely, immediately went to King Xerxes and reported the conspiracy, making sure to tell him that it was Mordecai who had uncovered it. She gave full credit to her cousin for his watchfulness and loyalty. The king took her warning very seriously. He knew that threats could come from anywhere, even from those who were supposed to protect him. He ordered an immediate investigation into the matter to see if it was true. The king's officials checked it out and found that Mordecai's information was accurate. Bigthan and Teresh were indeed planning to harm the king. The two conspirators were arrested and questioned, and after their guilt was proven, they were both hanged for their treason. The king was safe, thanks to Mordecai's quick thinking and Esther's bravery in speaking up. The entire event was carefully recorded in the Book of the Annals, the official chronicles of the king's reign. The record stated that it was Mordecai the Jew who had saved the king's life. But at that time, even though his deed was written down, Mordecai didn't receive any special reward or honor for his loyalty. Life at the palace just continued as usual. Sometime after these events, King Xerxes decided to promote one of his officials. This man's name was Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. The king elevated Haman above all the other nobles and princes who served him, giving him the highest seat of honor in the kingdom. Haman became the second most powerful man in the entire Persian Empire, right after the king himself. King Xerxes issued a command that all the royal officials at the king's gate must kneel down and pay honor to Haman. Everyone obeyed the king's command. Whenever Haman passed by, all the officials would bow low to the ground, showing him the utmost respect. But there was one man who just wouldn't bow. Mordecai, who still sat at the king's gate, refused to kneel before Haman. As a Jew, Mordecai believed he should only bow down to God. He just couldn't give that kind of honor to any man, no matter how powerful he was. The other royal officials at the gate noticed this. Day after day they saw Mordecai standing tall while everyone else was kneeling. They asked him, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" They kept talking to him about it, but he just wouldn't listen. He stood by his convictions. Eventually, to explain his actions, he told them that he was a Jew. When the officials saw that Mordecai wouldn't change his mind, they went and told Haman. They wanted to see if Haman would tolerate Mordecai's behavior. Haman was absolutely filled with rage when he saw for himself that Mordecai did not bow down or pay him honor. His pride was deeply wounded. And when he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, his anger grew even more intense. He thought it wasn't enough to punish only Mordecai. In his arrogance and hatred, he decided he would destroy all of Mordecai's people. Haman plotted to wipe out every single Jew, young and old, women and children, throughout the whole kingdom of Persia. To pick the perfect day for his terrible plan, Haman used a kind of lottery. He cast the pur, which is the Persian word for lot, to determine the month and the day for the destruction of the Jews. The lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. With the date set, Haman went to King Xerxes and said, There is a certain group of people scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. He even offered to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to have them destroyed. The king, trusting his chief minister, gave Haman his signet ring, allowing him to seal the decree with the king's authority. With the king's authority in his hand, Haman wasted no time. He had scribes write out the terrible decree. The order was sent by couriers to all 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. The decree commanded that on the 13th day of the month of Adar, all Jewish people, men, women, and children, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. It also gave the people permission to plunder their possessions. The decree, sealed with the king's signet ring, could not be changed. As the couriers rushed out to deliver the news, the city of Susa was thrown into confusion and dismay. While the king and Haman sat down to drink, the people of the city were bewildered by the cruel and sudden order. When Mordecai learned about the decree, his heart was, just broken. He was filled with sorrow and grief. In a public display of mourning, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, but no one was allowed to enter the gate wearing sackcloth. All across the kingdom, in every province where the king's edict arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, crying out to God in their despair. The future looked dark and hopeless for them. They were a people condemned to die. Esther's maids and eunuchs told her what Mordecai was doing. She was deeply distressed. She did not yet know the reason for his public grief. She sent clothes for him to wear instead of the sackcloth, but he refused to accept them. Confused and worried, Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her. She instructed him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why. Hathach went to the open square in front of the king's gate and found Mordecai. Mordecai told him everything that had happened. He explained all about Haman's plot and the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave Hathach a copy of the written decree to show to Esther. He urged her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach returned to Esther and relayed Mordecai's message. Esther sent a reply back to Mordecai, reminding him of a very dangerous law. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, there is but one law, that they be put to death. The only exception was if the king extended his golden scepter to them. But, she added, 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Mordecai sent back a final powerful message. Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai's words struck Esther's heart like an arrow. She understood the weight of her position and the danger her people were in. She realized that her life in the palace would not protect her if all other Jews were to be destroyed. Her fear was great, but her sense of duty was even greater. She made a brave and selfless decision. She sent a message back to Mordecai, a message of resolve and faith. She told him to gather all the Jews in Susa and to fast for her. They were not to eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. She and her attendants would do the same. After the fast, she would go to the king, even though it was against the law. With incredible courage, she declared, "If I perish, I perish." The Jewish community in Susa joined together in prayer and fasting. They lifted their voices to God, asking for protection for their brave queen and for deliverance from their enemies. For 3 long days and 3 dark nights, a spirit of unity and solemn prayer filled the city's Jewish quarter. Esther, in her royal apartments, also fasted and prayed. She prepared her heart and mind for the most dangerous moment of her life. She was about to risk everything, her crown, her status, and her very life, for the chance to save her people. It was a time of great testing, a moment where faith had to overcome fear, and courage had to shine brighter than despair. On the 3rd day, the fast ended. Esther put on her finest royal robes. She adorned herself to look like the queen she was, majestic and beautiful. Then, with her heart pounding, she walked through the palace and stood in the inner court, directly in front of the king's hall. King Xerxes was sitting on his royal throne facing the entrance. When he looked up and saw Queen Esther standing in the court, his heart softened. He was not filled with anger at her for breaking the law. Instead, he was pleased to see her. He held out the golden scepter that was in his hand, a sign of his favor and a promise that she would not be harmed. Esther approached the throne and touched the tip of the golden scepter. The king, seeing her, asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." The king's generous offer showed how much he cared for her. But Esther was wise. She knew this was not the right time or place to reveal her true purpose. Instead of blurting out her plea for her people, she made a simple, yet intriguing request. "If it pleases the king," she said, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." The king readily agreed, and he sent a message for Haman to hurry and join them. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther again, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther, with great patience and strategy, still did not reveal her true purpose. She knew she needed to create the perfect moment. She replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman left the banquet that day feeling joyful and high-spirited. He had been honored by the queen herself, invited to a private dinner with only the king. His pride swelled within him, but as he walked out through the king's gate, his good mood vanished in an instant. He saw Mordecai sitting there, and once again Mordecai did not rise or show any fear in his presence. Haman was filled with rage against Mordecai. He controlled his anger in public, but when he got home he immediately called for his wife Zeresh and all his friends. He boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, promoting him above everyone else. "And that's not all," Haman bragged. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow." But then his tone soured. "Yet all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and his friends had a wicked suggestion. "Have a pole set up, reaching a height of 50 cubits, they said, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go cheerfully to the banquet with the king." This idea delighted Haman, and he ordered the massive pole to be built immediately. That very night, the king could not sleep. Something was troubling his mind. To pass the long hours, he commanded that the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, be brought and read to him. As the servant read aloud, he came to the part that described how Mordecai had uncovered the plot of Bigthan and Teresh to assassinate the king. King Xerxes stopped the reader. "What honor or recognition has Mordecai received for this?" he asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." At that very moment, a sound was heard from the outer court. It was Haman, who had come early to ask the king for permission to execute Mordecai on the pole he had just built. The king asked, "Who is in the court?" His servants told him, "Haman is standing there." "Let him come in," the king commanded. When Haman entered, the king spoke before Haman could say a word. "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" he asked. Haman's heart leaped with pride. He thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So, he laid out a grand and elaborate plan. He suggested dressing the man in a royal robe the king himself had worn, and placing him on a royal horse the king had ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Haman continued, his imagination running wild with his own perceived glory. "Let one of the king's most noble princes be chosen to lead the horse," he said. "Let this prince put the robe on the man the king wishes to honor, and then lead him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king listened to the entire suggestion and nodded. "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect a single detail of all that you have recommended." Haman was stunned. The honor he had so carefully designed for himself was to be given to his most hated enemy. He could not disobey the king's direct order. So, with a heavy heart, Haman took the royal robe and the horse. He found Mordecai at the king's gate, dressed him in the king's own finery, and placed him on the royal horse. Haman then had to walk in front of the horse, leading it through the city square, shouting the proclamation for all to hear, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." After the humiliating parade was over, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home, his head covered in grief and shame. Later that day the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's second banquet. As they were drinking wine, the king once again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? What is your request?" This time, Esther was ready. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king was shocked. "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" he demanded. Esther looked directly at Haman and said, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Haman turned pale with terror. The king, in a rage, got up and went out into the palace garden. When he returned, he saw Haman had fallen on the couch where Esther was reclining, begging for his life. In his fury the king gave the order, and his eunuchs seized Haman. One of them, Harbona, pointed out, "A pole, 50 cubits high, stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai." The king commanded, "Impale him on it." Haman was punished on the very pole he had prepared for Mordecai. That same day, King Xerxes gave all of Haman's estate to Queen Esther. Mordecai was then brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, the one he had taken back from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's vast estate, but the danger was not yet over. The evil decree that Haman had written, sealed with the king's ring, was still in effect across the empire. It could not be revoked. Esther fell at the king's feet weeping. She begged him to put an end to the wicked plan of Haman the Agagite. The king once again extended his golden scepter to Esther. He told her and Mordecai that while the old law could not be cancelled, they could write a new one. He gave Mordecai permission to write a new decree in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. So Mordecai called the royal scribes. A new edict was written and sent to all 127 provinces. This new decree granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. It gave them the authority to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality that might attack them and their families on the 13th day of Adar. They were also given the right to plunder the property of their enemies. When the new decree was issued from Susa, the city rejoiced. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large golden crown, and a purple robe of fine linen. For the Jews there was light and gladness, joy and honor. As the news spread, many people from other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. When the 13th day of Adar finally arrived, the tables were turned. Instead of being victims, the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. They gathered in their cities to defend themselves. No one could stand against them. On that day the Jews struck down their enemies. In the citadel of Susa they defeated 500 men. At Esther's request, the fighting in Susa was extended for a second day, and the bodies of Haman's 10 sons, who had been killed, were displayed on poles. Across the provinces the Jews defeated 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not take any plunder. To celebrate this great deliverance, Mordecai established an annual festival. He declared that the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar should be celebrated every year. This festival was called Purim, named after the pur, or lot, that Haman had cast. It was to be a time of feasting and joy, of sending gifts of food to one another and giving presents to the poor, to remember how their sorrow was turned into joy. And so, the bravery of one queen and the faithfulness of her cousins saved a nation, a legacy of courage remembered for all time.